Morning, everyone. Welcome to Home Working by Rob. I'm going to hand over to Rob now, who's going to take through the presentation, and then towards the end, I'll jump back on and do any questions if anyone's got any questions.
Okay. Thanks, Chloe. A warm welcome to you all. By the way, they don't have to be questions. They can be whatever's resonating with you or echoed points that you want to make. This is about home working, but it's very much about the home part of home working and the psychological impact of that. This is one of the, I was saying to Chloe beforehand, this is one of those nice times when my day job as a digital consultant for Spark, part of BGSS, combines with my side work as a psychotherapist. And it originated because my engagement manager on my current project asked me a while back to just have a little think about what could be brought psychologically to the team table, as she'd noticed that team morale had been starting to sag under the first wave of lockdown. And I thought, well, yeah, what's that going to look like? And then I realized, well, this is very much the kind of thing that I would do in the first couple of sessions with a client anyhow. Now, I would do it with them and the client would speak and you're all there silently. Sorry about that. But the principles that I'm talking about, which are taken from cognitive behavioral psychotherapy and from transactional analysis and a little bit from Gestalt, would still remain true. So let me just share my screen. There we go. So hopefully you can see that. And so I'm going to take you through these 4 areas. Accounting for what's going on. One of those important things is just to notice stuff. It's all too easy, particularly when we are delivery focused people, to just crack on. Plus, you know, we're British, or in a British culture, and mustn't grumble, stiff upper lip, still has a powerful influence on how we work. So just listing out and noticing all the things that are placing us under stress. As I have my son in the living room doing his schoolwork, because I'm self-isolating at the moment because his dad has the virus at the moment, and my partner is upstairs working. And, you know, it's lovely, but it's a thing going on. And then having to think about coping with that stress. Now, I'm going to, in the past, when I've given this, I've gone into that quite extensively. I'm going to downplay that a little bit today because a lot of you have now got a lot of experience with coping. So I'm just going to notice how the coping strategies we do have a psychological impact on the stresses that we're under. And then deal a bit with how we can often get stuck, how we can get into what's known as an impasse, where we know the right thing to do, but we're not doing the right thing. And I'm totally in that bracket too. And then finally leave you with some easy materials where you can apply what I talked about yourself, either with yourself or with your partner or your wider family or with your team or colleagues. So let's have a little look at accounting. So isn't there a lot of things to account for? So first of all, I'm just going to zoom in and look at some of these background stresses, this global stress that we're under, and the open uncertainty. You know, when is this going to end? Yes, there may be a vaccine, but, you know, is it too good to be true? Can you trust it? Even if it is too good to be true, what are the logistics of being rolled out? When am I going to get it? In between times, am I going to get ill? Bruce, my partner's lovely ex, has it right on my virtual doorstep. I'm 61. I don't want to get it. I've seen it in Bruce. It's not an attractive look. Obviously, for some of you young ones, it's not a problem, but for the rest of us, it could have serious consequences and serious long-term consequences. And it's easy to get wrapped up in this and get captivated by this endless cycle of death news. How many people have it? How many people have been hospitalized? How many people have been ventilated? How many people have died? And not just here, but in America, in Brazil, in Russia, in all these places which aren't managing it really, really badly. There's my favorite book on death, which is exactly the kind of sentence you can do when you study psychotherapy, is called Staring at the Sun, by a guy called Irvin Yalom. And the title is a metaphor, because we all know, well, not today, but we all know that there is a sun out there, and it controls and pervades a lot of our life on this planet, but we can't look at it for any length of time because it would literally damage your eyesight. And death is pretty much like that. You know, death is coming at some point. But we tend to just brush that under the carpet, try and ignore it as best we can. It's not really helpful to get into a nihilistic frame of mind and get consumed by thoughts of our own impending mortality. So we put it in a little box and compartmental it away and hide it under some stuff. And yet it has a tantalizing lure to us, you know, partly why we love films that have so much death in it, such a high body count. And of course, all the boring things are harder. You know, shopping for food has suddenly become extraordinarily tedious. And then against these background stresses are a whole load of home stresses. So part of it can be putting yourself under stress. It's less now, but certainly at the beginning of lockdowns, there was a sentiment of, well, I could use this time to do X and do Y and improve myself somehow, as well as our own, you know, natural inclination not to grumble. But even if we discount for ourselves what's happening, that doesn't mean that we are unlikely to worry about our loved ones. Even if that worry is slightly just below our psychological horizon. It's not like we're constantly fretting about it, but it's there. And if you have any elderly relatives to worry about particularly, or people with underlying health conditions, it's an extra special worry. And also people who are used to putting themselves last, putting everybody else first, i.e. I've said mums, they're a classic, but other people too, will tend not to notice how much they are actually worried for themselves and for others. Then there's other stresses going on. We are in this lockdown state together a much more than we're used to. And our tendency is just to carry on as if nothing's happened and make the best of it, rather than having a talk about it. How are we going to handle this? How is it that I ended up in the study with its cold north-facing window, and my partner ended up on sunnier days in the conservatory with all the light and warmth? It's because of all my gears here, but you know, we could have managed it a little bit better if we'd managed it a little bit more consciously. And sharing all the bits and bobs and sharing the homeschooling that we're having to do. And the financial stresses. I'm hugely fortunate to work for BGSS, who's been very, very successful during this virus, this pandemic, but others less so. My partner lost her job when her lovely furniture making company that she was marketing manager went down the tubes. Luckily, she's been able to very quickly find a really interesting job instead, but there was a big wobble and it took an awful lot of emotional awareness around that. And that's just me and my stuff. You, of course, have got you. And it's important to recognize the sheer diversity of settings that people are finding themselves in. You may be alone. You may be not alone, but in a shared household of semi-strangers. You may, one of my stepsons is at university at the moment in shared flats, being severely locked down with people he barely knows. Maybe in a small family, a young family, a large family, maybe looking after elderly relatives. The list goes on and on. Now, all of this bubbling away, the global and the home, is really attacking our usual boundaries. So our boundaries are ways of managing our multiple selves in a non-weirdo kind of way. So, you know, there's a public Robert and a work Robert and a family Rob and a private Rob and a secret Rob who doesn't even mention the things of his private Rob and maybe unconscious. And we chop those up, those different ways of representing ourselves and those different identities in ways that are often usually punctuated by time and space. Your commute, as was a clear distinction between that part of yourself at home and this part of yourself at work. And that's gone. You know, I'm literally 3 steps away from my hall and the kitchen and the living room and all of the distractions of being at home. So a lot of people are experiencing compromised boundaries in their time between work and lunch and family lunch. I'm sure you remember lunch. And, you know, me time as well. And it creates or can create this sense of always being on, either on or being on is really close by and could break out at any moment. And so it's affecting our control to manage me and we, that sense of myself and that shared sense of self that I bring when I'm with other people. I could add another one to this, which is that I suspect we're getting out of the habit of being with other people. You know, I haven't seen many other people. I haven't been in a group in a long time now. And so if and when we go back to that, we all might feel collectively a bit teenagery, a bit gauche, a bit shy about some of that. It's impacted how we work. I'm not going to explore this particularly. At BGSS, we work in an agile way, and that is super collaborative, super posited on us all being together in a shared working environment that absolutely promotes discussion and being tapped on the elbow and, Rob, what do you think about this? And meetings that are very collective, where responsibility is shared, and all of that has kind of gone, and we've replaced it with the naffness that is Zoom or Teams or other networking environments. And certainly in BGSS, we've managed that pretty well, but it's definitely a suboptimum replacement for the richness of being together. And it's that being together that has really suffered. So one of the concepts I like is talking about this as a social recession. So we all know what an economic recession is, when economic activity declines and people become unemployed or underemployed. In a social recession, social activity has declined and people have become under-socialized, or to use more normal speak, lonely. And that's had some impacts on our mental health. We're not very good in our language at having words for mental health that don't sound a little bit catastrophic. I mean, even the phrase mental health is a little bit, you know, scary. So I try to talk about mentally poorly, mentally a bit out of sorts, perhaps a mental twinge. Yes, some of you may have more serious, more impactful consequences on your mental health, but for all of us, we will definitely be a little bit mentally under the weather from this social recession that we're living in. And we're likely to go through one of our mental poorlinesses that we're most prone to. So just like in physical health, you know, I'm prone to blocked noses and throat infections and stuff like that. Other people may be prone to indigestion or stomach complaints. Likewise, you'll have favorite mental conditions that you'll be more susceptible to than others. So you might be prone to social issues, social phobias. You'll see your friendships fading away. You may see your shyness increasing. You may be reluctant to show yourself on camera and so on. And you might then have a fantasy that if no one sees you, then it doesn't really matter because no one will miss you if you're not around. And so it'll encourage you just to, you know, go backwards and be less and less present, speak less, be seen less, say less. You might be prone to anxiety issues. These could be in the classic anxiety kind of stuff of that vibrant, anxious energy that doesn't go anywhere and just ruminates and zings around in your own head as you procrastinate and get nervous and restless and can't settle and worry. Or it might find its close cousin in terms of anger in its various forms. So classically, we think of anger in terms of the mad, shouty, explosive anger that people can exhibit, either as real mean kind of anger or a sort of flouncy, sudden burst of anger and then retreating, which is something I'm slightly prone to. But anger can also show itself in quiet, less angry ways. So implosive anger, sulking, where your anger is fuming away inside you and you might be creating a mood all around you and almost bending the walls in, and people are having to tiptoe around you lest they say the wrong thing and cause an explosive anger. Or the complete withdrawal. You're dead to me. You're nothing. I don't recognize you now. Just utterly cutting off, which is such a hurtful experience to be on the receiving end. You might be prone to depressive issues. And as a bonus, lots of people get depressiveness and anxiety run together. Thank you very much. And the depression can be that persistent low mood, the background sadness, the blackness. I mean, that is the textbook definition of depression, persistent low mood. It's not necessarily a big thing. You know, you don't have to be a sort of 19th century romantic and go, oh, you know, I'm so terrible today. Often it's a sucking away of color, a grayness, a sameness, a flatness. And so it can have this association of flat affect. Affect is a psychological word for how your mood is shown. Ennui, great word. Lusterness, nothing matters. It's all one. And if you don't suffer from that triple social anxiety or depressive one, then you may well be suffering from psychosomatic physical manifestations of your mental state. Now, people sometimes use psychosomatic to mean made up. There's nothing psychosomatic about, nothing made up about psychosomatic illnesses. They are a physical manifestation of your mental distress. Your body isn't just some sort of brain transporter carrying your head around for you. Your body is intimately linked to your brain. And the most direct route of linkage is your emotions, because your emotions have a ready tap to hormones that tell your body to do stuff. I mean, you'll know this instantly from anger, with the clenching of the fist and the tightening of the chest, and the urge to do something. And you'll see it in anxiety, where you'll also be in a highly energized physical state, but not be able to do anything, feel that you can't do anything with it. And you'll see it in depression, where the gaslight of your physical state is just turned down to low and you're barely able to get out of the sofa or bed or something like that. So you may suffer from things like muscular pains and headaches, and certainly loneliness has a direct psychological and physiological consequence. Lonely people get ill, physically ill, much more often. And thinking of this in terms of a recession, there is a nice way of thinking about this as an economy. The concept in transactional analysis is the stroke economy, where a stroke is a unit of measure of being seen, of having attention put onto you. And if you lack positive strokes, and these positive strokes don't need to be huge, you know, they don't have to be like, oh, Rob, that was an amazing presentation, thank you very much. They can be like, morning, Rob. That's being noticed. And that's been taken away from us. You know, my experience of going into a Nottingham office or Sheffield office is for people to say, hello, Rob. It's just nice. No one says hello to me when I come into this study. And if you don't have positive strokes, it doesn't just sit there. You tend to fill them up with negative ones. And the negative ones come from your mind, which I'll go into a little bit more. And that can make you very vulnerable, because it can then imply, if no one's giving me positive strokes, then no one cares. And if no one cares, then what's the point? And leave you with these hungers for contact with humanity, because we are social animals. So we think about a structure hunger. How do you manage a day? Well, work turns out to be a fantastic way of managing your day, with its meetings and its social interactions and its lunchtimes and all that. And without that, we have to work quite hard to manage it ourselves. And we can be hungry for incidents, for spontaneity. There is so little that is spontaneous at the moment. You know, what structure I do get is all diarized at the moment. No one just bumps into me and says, oh, Rob, good to see you. Could I just have a quick chat? Doesn't happen. And equally, it means there are no dramas and no highs, or indeed lows, which can lead you feeling the need for stimulus. Your senses, literally, my senses, need to see something more than the view outside of my window at the moment, to go to restaurants and have slap-up meals, to go to the cinema and see, you know, a blockbuster or something. Equally, the need to be recognized, to be seen, and to be seen to matter, so that we feel that our existence has a meaning outside of whatever we give it, that other people reinforce our sense of worth. And to have contact, emotional contact. Just, you know, I don't know, it coming up in January, you know, classically in the office, people will come in and then they'll confide that they may have overeaten and they need to lose some weight. And then you say, yeah, I did too, and I need to. And then you're having an emotional contact with each other. You're exploring vulnerabilities together, and you're supporting each other. And that's a rich little psychological interaction that just isn't possible at the moment. And then finally, sexual hunger. Now, I don't want to raise your expectations about BGSS. It's not that kind of organization. But then I'm not talking about swinging from the chandeliers kind of sexuality here. I'm talking about your erotic sense of self-worth. Just the tiddly little things, like if I'm going to a pitch, I will dress up in a suit and I'll wear a nice tie and I'll wear polished shoes, and someone will say, Rob, you look smart today. And that's a teeny tiny lower foothills of the world of eroticism. Or if you have your hair done and changed and people notice and remark, again, that's just a teeny tiny little feeding of that to make you feel good and hungry about stuff. So that's That's the world we're living in. Loads of stresses, blurred boundaries, ways of working that depend traditionally on us being close together, and working remotely just adds extra grit and makes work harder. And then this social recession that is leaving our stroke economy really poor and leading us vulnerable to being mentally out of sorts or worse. And if you have experience of mental illnesses, then of course these are going to be exacerbated, and you will, I hope, be applying some of the lessons that you learned the last time you had any kind of mental distress. Good news is there's lots of ways of coping. Lots of helpful ways of coping at work, lots of ways of coping as a person. And there are lots of ways in which you can cope that aren't necessarily hopeful, but I would encourage you to cut yourself some slack. We are in a time when we are not able to be our optimized self. I'm not going to go through these too much because I think this is quite a well-worn field now. Ironically, knowledge about how to cope well is really solidly founded. Not only do you have people like astronauts who choose to socially distance as a profession, but there is a canon of stuff that you can do which is straight out of the psychotherapy textbook for dealing with depression and anxiety. Go and exercise, get outside, change your view, get a bigger horizon so that you can see things in perspective. Sleep and relax and focus that into your day. Try and reframe events, not in a Pollyanna, oh, it's all wonderful, because it clearly isn't, but at least in, well, if I have to be locked down, then being locked down in my comfortable, well-provided home is as best a place as I could possibly manage it. Try and establish some sort of routine, and try and stay close to your favorite people as much as you can in these circumstances. I would also advocate paying attention to your inner child, because your poor inner child, your joie de vivre, your desire for excitement, that part of you that feeds so strongly from those hungers I mentioned, they need looking after. So make time to be silly, make time to play games, or to be off, or to do hobbies, so long as that hobby isn't like a personal development hobby, is a hobby that you just enjoy. And do what I've been encouraging you to do so far, which is account for going on regularly. It could be daily, could be weekly, could be monthly, whatever, but every so often, check out what your feelings are. And be aware that feelings are a bit like the weather. The clouds come, the rain comes, and then it goes, and then something else comes. And notice the stresses and strains that you're carrying and celebrate them. Well done you for carrying this load and getting through it. And notice what you've lost. I bloody love going to cafes, and I love going out for breakfast, and it's a real bugger. And sometimes I'll try and recreate that here at home, and sometimes I will just mourn the loss that there's something I can't do that I really like. I'm a big fan of journaling, of noticing the signs of when I'm not doing well, and noticing what triggers me, what sends me down, and then looking. So this is my mood from my journal. I use one called Dailyo, where back at the start of this, I literally saw my mood going down. And this is it through to September, where, it's been bumping along, but at least I've arrested that down trend. And noticing how things like my ability to relax has suffered. So when I last refreshed this, I noticed that my relaxation had really shot down. So I made a conscious effort. August was some time off to try and address that. And noticing what I'm doing. So yeah, I was doing a lot of chores, no surprise. I was watching more telly than I normally would do or somehow approve of. Well, give myself a break. And naturally, I was eating less exceptionally great meals because I was going out less. So again, what can you do about that? Now, what you can do about that is try and do better. And yet, there's a problem with that. And the problem is, whoops, sorry about that, is this stuff. Cognitive dissonance in the psychological speak, the holding of two mutually contradictory ideas or beliefs at the same time, or feeling an impasse, feeling stuck. It's where negative self-talk, so self-talk is what you say to yourself, and negative self-talk is where you give yourself a hard time, where that negative self-talk starts to argue with yourself, which is a strange thing, but is a common thing for all of us. So a nice little metaphorical model for what's going on in your head is this idea that we have an inner parent and an inner child and an adult self that tries to mediate between the two. And your inner parent is the summation of voices that you had from people who've been influential in your life. Obviously, parents themselves being key amongst those, but it could equally be whoever else mattered in your life. Their beliefs, their ideas about what you should and should not be have become internalized into your beliefs, your musts, your shoulds, your oughts. And your inner child is the layering up of all the different child experiences that you've had and represents your small, simple self. And you may not notice your inner child too much, particularly if you have a relatively serious nature, but you'll notice it when you're not at your best, when you're tired, or when you're ill, or now, when you may be suffering from being mentally under the weather. And a classic dynamic is this kind of thing where the inner parent tells you that you must or should, to take myself, I must not visit the fridge and the biscuit tin as much as I'm doing. And my inner child goes, but I'm bored and I'm alone and a biscuit will cheer me up. And my inner parent says, but you'll get fat and unhealthy and you won't like that. And they get into a proper little tussle where my inner child's, well, I'm doing it anyhow. I don't care, you can't make me. And your adult self, which is not history-based as the other two are, is trying to work out here and now what's the best thing to do, gets squashed in between these two and feels pretty uncomfortable with the constant argument that goes on. Cognitive dissonance often exhibits itself as a sort of slow anxiety that just rattles around in a battle that you fight yourself with over and over again. And you see from that either eccentric behaviors or self-defeating behaviors. Eccentric behaviors are things like, well, we're not at work, so no one's going to see us, so we can just do things that we wouldn't normally do. And the logic of it can be quite, seductive. I noticed myself I was thinking about Amy, my partner, what might she get me for Christmas? Might she get me some scent? And then I noticed in the bathroom cupboard that I hadn't been using scent very much. Of course I hadn't, because I hadn't been going outside. And then I thought, well, I better use it so to make space for her to buy me a Christmas present. And then I thought, well, when would I put some scent on? I thought, well, actually the time when we're, super closest together, when it would be nice if I smelled nice, was when we're going to bed. And I thought, well, that's great. I could put some, scent on a little bit, not too much, because we'll be close when I go to bed. And I thought, hang on, you're thinking about putting this on in the night rather than in the morning. Is that normal? I don't know. We're in a strange world. So, it's not necessarily bad, but just notice that sort of thing that's going on. As for self-defeating behaviors, like eating too much, your adult self often loses out in this battle between your inner parent and inner child, because the short-term certainty of a nice biscuit weighs more heavily than the long-term possibility of staying healthy. And it also wins out because threats and scares don't really work terribly well. If they did, this kind of cigarette packet advertising of these gruesome photos would be more effective than it is. Threatening or scaring yourself is really an invitation to go into flight or fight or freeze. And most of us go into flight or freeze. Most of us don't fight. And so we bury our head in the sand or try and ignore the messages. So, you know, you get these piles of shit that's coming our way. So here's some classic self-defeating behaviors: procrastination, overindulgence, too many biscuits, being sedentary, not addressing relationship problems when you're dissatisfied with something, but you're not finding a way to bring it up. And here's the fan that shit's heading towards, you know, unnecessary stress, poor health outcomes and stuff. This constant rattling around and getting stuck in this impasse will eventually lead to poorer mental states. But don't despair. There is stuff you can do. Classically, impasses at this level, there are deeper impasses that require proper deep psychotherapy to deal with, can be helped by socially incentivizing yourself, borrowing other people's inner parents so that they bolster yours, so that your inner child goes, well, okay, then it's not just me being unreasonable to myself. Everybody expects this of me. Well, if everybody expects this of me, I'm much more likely to want to conform. And giving yourself some sort of immediate reward. I imagine, being the people that we are here, we're all pretty good at deferred gratification, but instant gratification is still pretty marvelous. So finding a way to reward yourself here and now for the good behaviors you want, rather than trying to punish or scare yourself, is a much more effective way of treating this. And then monitoring your progress. So like my little graphs from my journal, contextualizing now, because we have a terrible, terrible short-term memory. And, you know, I can barely remember my weight last week, let alone, you know, last month or whatever. So contextualizing stuff and keeping the monitoring going, and then seeing the progress, which itself then becomes another immediate reward, is a great way of taking that inner struggle, that impasse, and giving yourself some adult self-control over the here and now, which is great because brains really like being in control of stuff. That's why partly anxiety is so anxious making, because you feel out of control. So taking some deliberate steps and bringing yourself into a much more controlled place where this impasse, this cognitive dissonance, is stilled by doing these kinds of things and avoiding some of these things. So I've identified two different ways. There are many, many more. So one is going into student mode. Obviously, if you live alone, you're much more vulnerable to this. Just having a chaotic routine and not having any clear boundaries between self and work or any of that kind of stuff, and treating your planning of life much like Homer Simpson tracing after donuts or something like that. Your determining principle is, what shall I do next? What do I fancy next? There's no higher self guiding you. And equally, going into yourself. So pretending that nothing's really happened and not reflecting on it. So thank you for staying with this talk in order to reflect on that. Staying too sedentary, both physically and mentally, but particularly physically. And yes, I'm pointing at me. Going into or being vulnerable into othering, getting into an us and them or us and me kind of frame. No one understands me, or you haven't talked to anybody, kind of thing. Using drink or indeed drugs, to recreational ones, to or indeed non-recreational ones like painkillers, to self-medicate yourself. What you're doing, if you use it too much, is you're using these things to regulate your mood. Well, a little bit of regulating your mood is fine, but if it becomes a crux, then no, it's not too helpful. And I'm absolutely not inviting yourself to beat yourself up and punish yourself around that. Absolutely not. Just as using food to regulate your mood, because, you know, biscuits cheer us up. But just notice you're doing it. Make a pact with yourself, which might be, I will deal with this much more healthily once this is all finished, or I will allow myself to do this, but just dial it down a little bit. And stop yourself unnecessarily self-isolating. Really, you know, I am self-isolating necessarily. It's not much fun. And, you know, if you're just finding yourself persistently tired or persistently headachy and all that kind of stuff, then just clue to yourself that you're having one of those psychosomatic kind of responses to the whole thing. And finally, use the resources, be interested in the resources that are around. So I found this one, this remote work canvas, which is a little way of planning out your response, your team's response, your family's response, whatever seems to be the problem area for you. And you don't have to fill in every square. You can just fill in the squares that seem important to you. I mean, I hope you'll manage your ergonomics now. In the first weeks of the original lockdown, I did my back in, and I did my back in because I had my desktop computer here and I had my laptop over here, and I was twisting around all the time. And so I've stopped doing that, and I've moved on to my desktop, and I've put my laptop in a bag. And then it used to upset me that I saw my bags I used to go to work with, and so I've hidden it from view so I can't see it. So these, you know, little micro negotiations just to make it all easier. So you can do this with yourself, you can do this with your partner, you can do this with your team. It's a really helpful way of just thinking comprehensively in the round about everything that's going on. And then finally, just give yourself a break. We're in a suboptimal world. You can't do things as well as they could be. So just be aware of what you need to do to sweep stuff under the carpet. So it's a lot of stuff, because it's a complex problem. I hope it's made sense to you, and I'd love to hear your reflections, what echoes with you, and any questions that you have. Hey, Chloe.
Hello. That was a great talk. Thank you very much for that. A very nice start to the Monday, and a very nice start to the beginning of Sheffield Digital Festival. Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions, if you could just put them in the Q&A, or if you have anything you'd like to share, you can comment in the chat.
Yeah, I'm really interested in anything that has hit home with you that, you know, you may not have noticed yourself.
So we've got a question already from Greg, who has said, that was really interesting, thank you. He was trying to capture notes throughout, but I think he might have missed some. Will this be made available afterwards? Yes, it will be made available afterwards. If you go on to bjss.com/Sheffield, we will try and get them uploaded for you today, so that you can have a read through.
Yeah, and I'll make some of this material available on PDFs. We can upload that. It is a lot to take on. It's surprising when you scrape away the surface, because if you ask people how you're doing, they go, "Oh, I'm fine," and then you unpack fine, and there's a lot that we're carrying. I mean, I got obsessed with the American election, which was not really very helpful. unnecessary worry.
You can end up reading into too much sometimes, can't you? Especially when you've got notifications on your phone coming up with news constantly pinging you.
Yeah.
It's hard to switch off from that.
Yep. The Guardian is constantly bothering me. Slack is constantly bothering me. Emails are constantly bothering me. I do have to try and tame some of that in order to, do the work thing, the bit I do between Zoom meetings. I mustn't grumble. Is there a value in having a bit of a grumble session just to get it off your chest? Or is it likely to spiral into negativity? Well, Greg, that's a great insight. So if you're always grumbling, and if you're always framing stuff in the negative, then that's unhealthy. That will lead you into depressive and negative thoughts. And if you're always looking on the bright side and telling yourself the glass is half full and being a bit of a Pollyanna and trying to cheer everybody up, then you will create this shadow part of yourself where all the negativity is bubbling away beneath the surface. And the likelihood is that if something comes to upset your equilibrium, it will pop out. So I found myself getting very tutty and flouncy in the queue to get into Sainsbury when someone would accidentally get less than 2 meters away from me. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's an overreaction. Normally I like to think of myself as a calm and quiet person. Just, oh my God. And then it's like, oh, where did that come? Well, it came from the soup underneath of negativity that I wasn't really addressing. I wasn't really admitting to myself. So yes, having a grumble is a good thing. And that's one of the reasons why in Agile methodology, we have retros where specifically, usually we are asked to address the things that aren't working and the things that are a bit meh, as well as the good things. Obviously, if those things come to us, then we're likely to take them too personally, so you have to be careful. Yeah, retrospective, good ways. That's good. Thank you, Jamie. I didn't notice that before I mentioned that. So yeah, it's a kind of Goldilocks thing. A bit of grumbling is absolutely good and grounded. It's admitting what you're finding difficult. Like this.
So Jamie has just said that he's found sprint retrospectives are a good way for team members to express the issues that they've faced, as other members can help in areas that they haven't previously considered. Yeah. Do you find that as well, Rob, that kind of sprint retrospectives are a good way for people to kind of get things off their chest? And
it's also a great way of getting you out of generalizing the universe from you. We are all self-centered. We are all slightly grandiose because we assume we're right and we assume we know stuff, and therefore surely the whole world is me. And it's not, evidently, sadly. So yeah, getting those alternate perspectives is really important. Dave asks about, how do you talk about this sort of stuff without sounding fluffy? Well, luckily I work in Spark, which is the creative design and user experience part of BGSS. So fluffy is our default status. And people expect it of me. But if you come from, like a serious software engineering background or somewhere where work is more grown up, then yeah, it's a difficult thing to start to talk about. So the best place is to start to talk about self. So it's to lay some ground rules. I want us to talk about how we're really doing here. I want to make it okay for everybody to be not super great. And I'm more interested in how you're doing beyond the fine, because I know this is really difficult. And I'm struggling with my weight. I'm struggling with getting out because it's cold and I don't really like exercise very much. I'm struggling with not noticing how lonely I can get. Is anyone else struggling with those things or other things? So using yourself to model, it's a bit of a risk because it will make you exposed. But it's only by sharing our vulnerabilities can you expect other people to share their vulnerabilities. And again, there's a little bit of a Goldilocks thing here. So some people don't like to do that directly through talk. So you can do it indirectly through things like drawing. Yeah, that does sound a bit fluffy, but it puts the psychological dangerousness of really admitting how you're feeling at one remove. Because some of the team, it's not that they're hiding their psychological state from you, it's they're hiding their psychological state from themselves. They're not accounting for everything that's going on. They are literally telling themselves they're fine. I remember I worked on a project for domestic violence perpetrators, and it was a group, and a lot of the work was done in a group, and a new guy came in and he was asked, how are you doing? He said, I'm fine. He's like, well, hands up everybody who thinks that Douglas isn't fine. And that, you know, and he had no idea. He had no idea that his anger was just like boiling right there, right under the surface. So only by sharing as much as you're prepared and okay to share. So you don't have to overshare, you don't have to overdo it. You can put a foot out and then see if someone takes steps with you, and then do a little bit more with the my advice around that. And making it okay to be suboptimal yourself. Tell them what you've swept under the carpet. Tell them that at lunchtime, actually, you had to go and have a little nap because you were just zoomed out. Because actually Zoom is a really, or Teams or whatever, is a really poor mechanism because we miss all the little psychological clues that we normally get when we're interacting with people face to face. Yeah, absolutely, Jamie. There is and particularly in work, you know, we in BGSF have a very, very, very strong delivery culture. We do whatever is necessary to get the job done, and that's great. But in these times, whilst we're maintaining that, we're also maintaining a really strong eye on the emotional temperature of our teams. And you'll notice it, a really good way to think of it, even without having to speak about it, is noticing the energy. How many people are attending meetings? How many people are turning off their cameras? Who are the people saying stuff and who are the people not saying stuff? So who are people disappearing into the background, and how might you reach out to them, either in one-to-ones or by prompting a person you know that they trust to have a chat with them. Because the energy in the group is, particularly at work, is quite tangible when you start to notice how excited or not people are at doing stuff. And it's not to suggest that you need them to all be, you know, jazz hands all the time. You know, it's fine to be knackered on Friday afternoon. It's great to acknowledge that, you know, hump day has just passed its peak and it's Wednesday afternoon and we're on the slide down and all the rest of it. And we're coming into Christmas. So normally this is a huffing and puffing month, November. It's not the favorite month. You know, it doesn't have Christmas, the nights have gone in, it's cold, it's wet, blah, blah. One thing I would encourage you to think about is actually Christmas. For many of you, you will have a couple of weeks off. Chances are it's not going to be the normal Christmas. It's going to be a bit suboptimal, just, you know, in line with the rest of 2020. So how might you use Christmas as a proper rest, as a lung, to do something different, to break the cycle of what you've been doing to keep going? And you don't have to decide that yourself. In fact, it's probably better not to decide that yourself. Talk to your partner, talk to your family, about how you want to do that and what you could do to make it a proper rest, because it is a real chance to just from all of this, because it's been a strain. It's been a big strain, and we've all done pretty marvelously coping with that strain. And given we can't go off to the Canary Isles or something and sip margaritas, what can we do instead to help us cope with all that's going on for us? And really, that's the central message. Notice what's going on so that you can manage as best you can to cope as best you can. If that was it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rob. I think that's all of the questions in the chat that we've got. So thank you very much for hosting, and thank you everyone for coming. Like we said, we will be popping this up on bjss.com/Sheffield, hopefully today, if not tomorrow. And there's loads of other events on. I think later this week we've got for Spark, digital transformation within the government, and also service design 101 later on in the week. So keep an eye out for those events as well. But thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you everybody for staying with and watching. And yeah, we will release these things. Use them, think about them. I would love it to help you just a little bit. Thanks very much.